spend the next 35, maybe 40 minutes talking about the landscape of clinical trials and the evolving landscape, is I think the way it was presented. I couldn't help but think as I was preparing for this that the metaphor that kept coming to mind for me was geology. We all know that things in geology happen very slowly, and then they happen all at once. And I feel like we're at a place right now where, from a clinical trial perspective, there are some megatrends that feel like earthquakes, fires, and floods all at the same time. And so while clinical trials may have been fairly staid in the last few decades, the disruption now is really significant. So consider a couple of things. I'll throw out three to chew on. One is that IQVIA this year, in their latest data, suggests that clinical trials have a 93% failure rate, and that's from molecule through approval. It's, I think, the lowest they've had ever. All that in the context of an industry that spends an increasing amount of money and takes an increasing amount of time to run clinical trials. The second thing I'd ask you to consider is the globalization of clinical trials. Just this year, the US, China has jumped to the #2 position in clinical trials. China is now running 30% of the clinical trials globally. The US is still leading at 35%, and the EU has fallen back to about 25%, with the rest of the world taking up the other 10%. So massive disruption there. At the same time, I think for every, I've seen statistics that for every biotech startup in the United States right now, there are 10 in China. So that's creating competition and investment from the United States. And clinical trials in China are purported to be 3 times faster and 3 times cheaper. So we've got a high failure rate globally for clinical trials. We've got massive global disruption. And then, as we've been hearing all day, AI is changing the landscape radically. Just a year ago, we were talking about very different things than we are today. From discovery through design, patient recruitment, and analysis, we're seeing AI evolve from basic process automation to suddenly generative content and into the world of agentic engagement with patients. And so we've got fires, earthquakes, and floods all happening at the same time, and all of these things are starting to affect clinical trials. So to explore this landscape, I'm joined by 3 fantastic panelists, Amy, Cameron, and Chuck. I'll let them introduce themselves in a moment. What I really want to explore is not necessarily these megatrends, but how these megatrends, what are the downstream effects of these, and what are the challenges and opportunities that these trends are creating today for Utah companies, Utah investors, and Utah entrepreneurs. So thanks for joining me, and we'll just go in order for our introductions. So Cameron.
Hi, Cameron Mealey. I'm Business Development Director with Avance Clinical. We are a global CRO based out of Australia. Kick it over to Amy.
I'm Amy Goodman. I am the Senior Director for Research and Strategic Partnerships at the University of Utah Data Coordinating Center. We are a full-service academic research organization based within the University of Utah Health System. I am a biomedical engineer by training and spent most of my career before joining the Utah DCC in medical device early stage companies in the San Francisco Bay Area.
Chuck Bucklar. I work for Uncommon Cures. We're a company focused on design and execution of rare disease clinical trials. I was also a biomedical engineer, but unlike Amy, I never used my degree.
Thanks again for joining. So there's 4 or 5, we actually did some prep for this. There's 4 or 5 topics we'd like to explore. I'll start with maybe the easy one, innovation in clinical trials. And I say easy simply because there are so many changes happening that innovation is a really good place to start. By way of background, we all know that clinical trials are being disrupted in every direction. Technology is decentralizing. A lot of decentralized elements are creeping in to bring trials closer to patients, and at the same time creating some concerns among CROs and sponsors. Regulators have provided tailwinds for many of these technologies and pushed industry to adopt many of them. And some of the technologies like AI that are emerging so fast that it seems that regulators are having a hard time keeping up with those things. And then finally, depending on your perspective, Washington is either bringing in welcome change or descending into chaos, and maybe it's all those things at the same time. So we've got quite a few things that are starting to affect clinical trials. So I'm going to start, Chuck, with you. We talked about regulators a little bit. In some cases, they're driving change, and in some cases, they're scrambling to catch up. So in your view, where are they ahead? Where are they behind? And what do you want to see from them?
I'll channel my inner Peter Marks. Anybody who went to the earlier programs, Peter did a great job describing one is where regulators are getting ahead, and that is pushing companies to engage early and often. The FDA in particular has done a very nice job with their Interact meetings. It goes before a pre-IND meeting, and it's a wonderful opportunity to actually engage the FDA in a non-binding conversation, and they really welcome that. So our experience has been the FDA has welcomed those interactions, and it helps give you clarity. When we talk to how you get funding, well, sometimes getting clarity from an agency also helps in that direction as well. Where there's challenges is harmonization. We have so many companies, you're not bringing a drug to market, especially in the rare disease space or any space, just to treat patients in the US or patients in the EU or Australia. You're doing so to treat every patient, hopefully across the globe. And that lack of harmonization means is we work on a clinical trial design, early one for the FDA, the question being, what's the European medicines going to do with that? And that's a vexing question for companies, and really, it causes some extended timelines, and or heartburn. And so I look at that, the harmonization as being one area where wouldn't it be great if, and there's no reason we can't, globally harmonize some of the regulatory approaches to drug development.
Thank you. Amy, I'm going to pick on you next. Decentralized clinical trials 5 years ago, I think were there was a lot of over-promising and under-delivering. And yet, it seems to me that these decentralized clinical trial elements have crept into almost every trial at some level. How do you balance, when you think about bringing trials closer to patients, making them more convenient, including technologies and decentralized elements, how do you balance patient convenience with data quality?
Thanks. So I think when you're thinking about designing your clinical trial, there are a number of things to keep in mind, but most importantly, you need to make sure you know what your primary outcome and your safety data are going to be. And I think as we think about convenience for the participants, we need to make sure that we're not losing quality in those 2 elements. So I think there are many ways that you can look at having decentralized elements of your clinical trial that are going to make it easier to conduct, maybe will help with enrollment. You can look at having participants provide data, through wearables, or maybe some of the outcome assessments can be assessed over the telephone or over a Zoom call. But I think it's important to think about all the ways that you can help the participant have an easier time with getting through the elements of the study, but always keeping an eye on that primary outcome and making sure that you're not sacrificing quality there.
Cameron, any thoughts on decentralization of trials, regulation, and any of the, how is that affecting you and your business, especially as you're focused in Australia, which we'll come to in a minute?
Yeah, I think from a regulatory standpoint, having predictability is important. I think we're finding most success as of late, at least with sponsors that are engaging a CRO to, early and often, engaging not only in designing a trial, but in the protocol development, and really working as a collaborative partner with a sponsor to develop every element of the trial.
Thank you.
Yeah, one thing with centralized trials is that, one of the stats that actually is published in rare diseases, and I assume it's probably true across all disease states, is that 55% of the failure within rare disease, drugs, from molecule to, to approval, 55% of those failures are due to poor enrollment and poor retention. That means if that patient experience is poor, they don't stick with it. You as a sponsor company, or you as the CRO, how do you're falling behind. You may not be able to complete that trial. And I think having a trial that's decentralized, one where maybe they never cross your door of a clinic, is wonderful, because these families, these patients, they have that burden's many times significant, and travel's tough.
So let's shift and maybe unpack some of the global trends a little bit and see how they're affecting your individual businesses and experiences. As I alluded to, Australia has become a hotspot for early stage trials. It seems like a very regulatory friendly environment and some really good financial breaks. Eastern Europe continues to run a lot of trials for Europe, and I mentioned China's explosion in clinical trials and startups. So we're seeing really a global reordering of clinical trials. Cameron, let's start with Australia. I've had 3 questions from people today already about Australia. Everybody's curious. What's up with Australia? What's the value proposition? Is this a niche, or is this the beginning of is this a nascent trend?
Dave, I think it's been going on for a while and is really starting to catch steam now. The regulatory environment relative to other regulatory bodies is extremely favorable to sponsors. You have study startup times that are cut nearly in half. You can get a study up and running in 4 to 6 weeks rather than 12 to 16 in many cases. There are tax incentives, right? And we could talk about that further, but for qualified sponsors, which is largely most biotechs, would be eligible for upwards of 43.5% of their money back from the Australian government for conducting research and development. And that expands beyond just phase 1. It's for all work conducted in Australia. Turn it back over, but continue on that if you'd like.
Amy, you're at the University of Utah, right up the street, and I think we're all proud of the U as essentially a global influence. You're at the crossroads there. Talk to us a little bit about China, U.S. investment in China, and how will investment in the growth of Chinese startups affect U.S. startups, and are you seeing that?
So that's very good questions. I can say I can't speak too much to this because, I am not personally involved in any trials that are going on in China, but I do know that there's a lot of work going on in China, and as I understand it, there are opportunities for U.S. companies to potentially license technology or license work that is coming out of China, and I imagine that there are ways that work could be leveraged to help move U.S.-based companies forward. I can't remember where I heard it. I can't remember if it was from one of you all in one of our conversations, but for companies that are in the U.S., as you're considering who your competitors are, my understanding is that you need to also be aware of many competitors that you're not aware of that might be coming out of China.
Anything else on global trends? I'm cognizant of time. Can we move to the next subject, or any comments on global trends?
I think you moved, Dave.
All right, the investment environment, and I think this ties in really nicely. As probably many people in this room know, certainly our pipeline shows this, the investment environment has been very challenging. The peak was probably around 21, something like that. And depending on whose forecast you look at, we've recovered or are maybe in the process of recovering back to certainly pre-pandemic levels and maybe 21 levels. However, there's some big asterisks on that. A lot of that investment, my understanding, maybe as much as half of it, has gone to a handful of mega deals, which then means there's less to go around for all of the other startups. So the investment environment is very challenging. And in a wild sort of catch-22 that we see often, many of our customers are trying to raise money to run clinical trials to get data, even as the investors who are on the sidelines are wanting to de-risk their investments with data. So the industry seems to be in a bit of a catch-22. So let me start this one. Cameron, I'm going to go to you first on this one. How are startups adapting to this investment environment?
I think you described it well, catch-22 environment, right? Back to the old adage of it takes money to make money. Same philosophy applies with the funding environment. Could you repeat the last part of your question?
Yeah, so the question for you is how are startups adapting to this investment environment, the very tight money supply for them?
Yeah, I think grants are becoming more and more popular. Everybody's seeking grants. The investment trends are funding coming at a safer level later. Rather than being first to the market or first to investment, we're seeing a trend where investment is coming at a later, maybe more safer position. How are we adapting? I think JP Morgan 2026 is going to be very interesting. I think we'll learn a lot there.
Who's going to JP Morgan? Raise your hand. Cool, see you there. We'll fight for a coffee table somewhere. So Chuck, let me just generally ask you then, what investment trends are you seeing among your clients and companies?
I'd love to say I'm seeing it loosening up, but we're really not. We've heard from the VCs that, we're keeping our powder dry, then we hear the LPs aren't keeping them powder. Who knows? What I do know is that we are seeing some investments coming in, people having success, but generally you've got to have some sort of way you de-risked your asset. And some of that's via a regulatory strategy. If you can come and say something concrete you have on the reg side, and I'll go back to Interact meeting, that can unlock an investment. Having a value proposition, actually thinking about your performance. Is there some market access or maybe even early commercial information you put into that so that someone get their arms around, hey, this is actually there's the viability here. This is a commercially viable product if it gets to market. That can help. But I do think that the easiest path, or the one that I've seen that had most success, is those conversations with regulators. Everybody can they can put an anchor in that. They understand that, hey, they got feedback from an agency. Okay, this makes more sense to us.
Let's shift to the business models out there. With all these disruptors, global trends, investment, AI. I'm seeing the traditional relationship between sponsors, CROs, sites, and patients reforming. There's a lot of pressure, it seems like, and a lot of friction at each one of those places. For example, what I've seen is many large sponsors are taking more of the value-add services internally for trials. That's putting a squeeze on even the largest CROs, who in some cases are being relegated to providing bodies as part of a team. They might not put it in quite that way. They talk about partnership, but if you look at what they used to do and what they're doing now with some of their largest clients, they've lost some of the value-add work to the sponsors themselves. And then sites have gotten squeezed in a couple of ways. Maybe not squeezed, because I think there's benefit here, but private equity, as we know, has gobbled up sites and is working hard to change the business model of sites, even as CROs are beginning to invest in some of their own sites. So a site once, not long ago, told me, the CRO we thought was our partner is now our competitor. And then last but not least, patients are demanding more agency, patients are harder to find, and patients are demanding more solutions that bring the trial closer to them, which also puts both technology and process pressure on the sites themselves. So it's a very complicated scenario. Amy, you're in the middle of this. We've partnered on a deal in the past. Tell me, are you seeing the traditional relationships breaking down? And what are you seeing evolving from those traditional relationships?
Thanks. So I'm at the Utah DCC, so I mentioned we're an ARO, that's Academic Research Organization. So it's like a CRO, but within the university health system. And we differ a little bit from some CROs in that we really try to form a strong partnership with our customers and work with them very early on protocol design and really engaging with them on the science side. So that's one of our core offerings as an academic research organization. So from that perspective, we are still involving that aspect of the relationship in all of our, in all of the deals that we're doing. I will say that we are seeing some of our customers wanting to bring more things in-house. So that's definitely something that we've seen. I have really enjoyed our collaboration with your CRO, where we're able to pull together some of your strengths with decentralized trials and our strengths with statistics and data management. So from my perspective, we really are, we're not seeing that breakdown, at least in our relationships, because we're really limiting our relationships to those where we can have that scientific engagement. Yeah.
Cameron, with a view to Australia, are you seeing a change in the business model? And it seems to me that primarily Australia is working or is growing in popularity with startups, not necessarily the large sponsors. But to what extent are you seeing a changing dynamic between sponsors, CROs, sites, and even patients' relationships?
Yeah, good question. I think a lot more CROs are entering the space. It's becoming a more competitive landscape in Australia because of the inherent benefits of taking a study or multiple studies to Australia. I think Amy hit on something that I wanted to touch on, which was trust, right? Trust in the sponsor and the trust that they have in you as a CRO and as a partner. I think that goes far and beyond just about anything else, is can you trust your CRO to deliver on the work? Have they been reliable? And if so, that partnership forges into additional business and therefore streamlining not only the CRO's business, but also the sponsor's business. So just to expand on that just a little bit.
Thanks. And Chuck, rare disease is a rare area. It's a unique place already. How are you seeing the landscape evolve there?
Well, it's funny, my aperture is rare, so it is a bit narrow. But we've seen a lot of the changes, not so much from the CRO or site standpoint, well, actually a site standpoint, but the academic sites, where the pressure on, where generally, when I was at BioUtah in a previous life, we'd hire a CRO for rare disease, we'd spin up 20 or 30 academic sites, they had patients, and off we'd roll. And many of the academic sites are under a lot of pressure and are difficult to take on trials. And so that's one of the areas where we're starting to see, where, for us, obviously, maybe an opportunity, but also it's, it is changing. At the U of U, you have actually kind of, I call it unique, but a really positive situation as far as clinical trials. But they're kind of a unicorn out there as an organization that's embraced it and actually it brings a lot of unique capabilities. So as an ARO, we like the U of U and actually intend on putting down, if you will, brick and mortar in Salt Lake City at some point in time.
Okay, the subject of the day has been AI. It's been in almost every presentation. I'd love to get a conversation going around what we're seeing in our respective companies or among our partners or sponsors that we're working with. And if I were to summarize it, it promises to streamline clinical trials in so many ways, and at the same time, it's very difficult to get one's head around the possibilities. And we, in our company, we have begun to use it in everything from the building and rebuilding of our virtual site, where from version 1 to 2 to 3, we've done it with fewer people and in less time by orders of magnitude each time. We have begun to explore agentic AI as a way to engage with patients, and we bump into some regulatory hurdles there. Not necessarily blocks, but just regulatory hurdles that have not been revisited in the last 6 months. And so we're seeing everything from tactical usage of AI in recruiting patients to strategic usage of AI to enable our virtual site and all sorts of operational opportunities in between, from sales and marketing through finance. So it's a very, very broad question. Cameron, I'll start with you. Is your CRO using AI? And maybe to broaden that question, how do you see your partners using it or the sponsors you're working with in clinical trials?
Yeah, I think everybody's talking about AI. In fact, one of the presenters earlier said, if you're not using it, you're behind. I think that rings true, not just in this industry, but every industry. I think from a protocol development, study design perspective, AI can only enable us to increase efficiencies. As far as partners go, every conference I go to, every partner we talk to is talking about how to more effectively incorporate AI into their offerings. And I think down the line, more will be yielded. I can't really speak to exactly what those partners are doing, but I know it's top of mind with every single vendor, every single partner.
Okay. Amy, I'm going to come to you last. I'm going to skip over because everybody wants to know what the U is doing with AI or what you're seeing. Chuck, how about you?
Well, I wrote a press release once. It was quite easy with AI, never before. But actually, one area we're seeing, I'll give you, is in registries. Agentic AI are trying to, so it's easier for a patient to enter the data they want or to actually go into medical records and get data. Because to get longitudinal data in these registries can be difficult, and there's a wonderful place for AI to play there.
Amy.
Okay, so I'm going to limit the scope of my comments to the Data Coordinating Center and our work, because I know there's a lot of exciting AI work going on at the U in general, but I won't speak to all of that today. At the Utah DCC, we are primarily using AI for operational efficiencies, much like you all have been describing. I mean, I think it's fantastic when you can feed your study documents into a system and have it tell you, oh, this is discrepant with that. And you can find all of those little areas that we all know from our years and years of clinical research experience are going to come back to cause problems. And so if you can find those up front and deal with them and have a very clean protocol and documentation, I mean, that's just fantastic all around. So I would say we're using AI in that capacity and throughout all of our operations to try to find those efficiencies.
Okay, I'm going to make two appeals here. One is I'd love to entertain some questions from the audience in a few minutes for these folks. That's the first appeal. So please think through some questions that you might have for Cameron, Amy, or Chuck. And I'm fair game too, but I really want to focus on their expertise. Secondly, perhaps if the conversation continues, these would be good people to chat with at the reception. Are you all going to be here at the reception at 5 o'clock? Okay, good. So I'm hoping this maybe stimulates some contacts and some discussion outside of this. But where I'd like to shift to now, in order to get us thinking a little bit, is a little bit of a lightning round. So I'm going to ask you each. I'm going to ask a question, and I'd like each of you to respond. And the response can be I pass, or it can be a one-word answer that the question prompts for you. We can dig in a little bit, but I'll leave it to the audience to pick up on some of the questions that you'd like to follow up with. Is everybody ready? You got the rules. You can pass is a fair answer.
Pass.
Or a one-word answer. So, Chuck, I'm going to start with you on this one. Decentralized trials, legitimate progress or overhyped buzzword?
Progress.
Progress.
Okay, all aligned. Real-world data replacing control arms, the future or regulatory fantasy?
A mix.
Regulatory fantasy.
Somewhere in between.
I didn't say in between was an answer.
Mix.
Okay. All right, next one. Clinical grade data from consumer devices, Apple Watch, Oura Rings, Whoops, et cetera. Valid or laughable?
Valid.
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 No concerns. Virtual principal investigators, acceptable or unacceptable?
Unacceptable.
Depends.
Situational.
Okay, I got to dig into this one. Unacceptable, and then 2, depends. I get the depends because you got to hedge on something like this. Why unacceptable?
I don't know. I mean, maybe just I'm old school. I just think that's one area where just to have that human element, right? You know, because you're making ethical decisions. I just don't replace it.
And 2 hedging answers. So, Amy, why are you hedging?
So I think it depends on the risk of the study and what you're looking at. I mean, you might not need to have a PI be there seeing the person, in person in order to have proper oversight. But I really do think it's a risk-based approach question.
Yeah, I would echo that.
Okay. Hybrid trials, and you can, so all of the above is an okay answer here too. Hybrid trials, more complexity for CROs or more flexibility for patients?
I'll pass.
More
complexity for CROs and
for-
sites, or more flexibility for patients?
More flexibility for patients.
Okay.
Probably a little bit of both.
A little bit of both? Say more.
And anytime you increase complexity,
Yeah.
the downstream effects will ultimately play a factor, and that's kind of my thinking behind it.
Okay. Okay. AI-driven protocol design, ready for prime time or not trustworthy yet?
I think it makes it more efficient, but you got to test it. AI is only as good as the information fed into it, so you have to have that human expertise element ultimately running hard on it.
I would say it is ready for prime time with the caveat that it's going to give you your first draft, and then you have to have a person.
Yeah, ready with oversight.
Okay. I'm going to start with you on the next one. We'll reverse the order because you've been hanging out on a limb on each one of these. Wearables and continuous monitoring, game changer or data overload?
Game changer.
Game changer.
Game changer.
Yeah. Fully virtual or fully decentralized trials with no sites, inevitable or impractical?
Impractical.
Pass.
Can be done in certain, disease states. I think that there are places where the patient should never cross a trial site's. Their home is their site, and I think that's doable.
Okay. We'll start with you again, Cameron. Patient-reported outcomes in apps, more or less reliable than site-collected data?
Equal. Subjective.
It depends.
I'll go with pass.
Okay, let's unpack this one a little bit. Why does it depend?
Well, I think it depends on what exactly you're collecting. Before I came to the University of Utah, I worked for many years on a headache therapy, and we were collecting data from a device that was in the hand of the patient, and you needed to get it right then. You needed to know what their pain was right then. So much better. But I think with in other situations, you're going to need something totally different.
Okay, last one, I'll start with you, Amy. I used the statistic that from IQVIA, credit them, that 93% of clinical trials now fail. Sustainable or unsustainable model?
It can be sustainable if the ones that succeed, depending on the ones that succeed. That's it.
Chuck?
I think it's unsustainable.
Sustainable as long as the volume of trials maintains or increases.
Okay. we've got 5 minutes left, and I asked you all to think of some questions, so I'd love to entertain those now. Do we have any from the audience? I've got a bright light here, so the gentleman in the...
Right over here is a, right there.
Oh, great.
See, if you're at the last session, you would have seen it, but maybe you weren't.
David over at IBEX Preclinical. Since I'm not on the clinical side of things, but I'm working as a contract research organization, what can be done to help in the evolving landscape for clinical trials to prep or set up for success when sponsors and clinical CROs first get off the road and make traction?
Please rephrase the last sentence.
What can be done to set up success prior to clinical trials, CROs interacting with sponsors?
Well, I'll take the first crack at that. From our standpoint, early engagement is key. And with these trends and with some of these semi-controversial topics we've talked about, e-pro or patient-reported outcomes or wearable technologies or at-home tests, things like that. The mistake that I think often leads to problems later is not understanding how these things can be designed into a protocol early. Often I think sponsors might end up with the worst of both worlds because they design a traditional trial and then they try to shoehorn some technology or process into it, and it becomes a burden on the patient and it becomes complex. So I would say early engagement in order to fully realize the benefits of these technologies in the trial design.
And I'd take it one step further and be early engagement with the patients, with your outcomes. Make sure it's what matters to them. Because that's, if it matters to them, one is you're going to get better trial design, and two, you probably get better recruiting and retention.
Thanks. Yes.
Yeah, I would say, are you on the business development side of preclinical?
I'm actually a study director for preclinical research design.
So personally speaking, I encourage collaboration. So I would love to collaborate at a preclinical to clinical CRO level and say, what have you guys been experiencing? What are the results you're seeing? How can we piggyback on those as a phase 1 CRO, whether that be healthy volunteer or a SAD MAD with a cohort. But I'd like to see collaboration, and I think that's important.
Thank you. Let's get a couple more questions, and thanks for stepping up.
Spencer Walker with the Center for Medical Innovations at the University of Utah. 93% failure rates in your clinical trials is a staggering number. Can you allude a little bit more as to why that number is so high? Because you look at any other business, and if you're only having, 7% success rate, how do you even stay in a business and things like that?
So I'll credit, IQVIA has an independent research group, and this is a statistic I got from them at a recent conference, I think at the HLTH conference. But so I'm paraphrasing what I learned from them. That was a statistic from molecule to approval. And really the answer was this tremendous waterfall of failure at each step. And so from the initial idea to a successful marketable drug it continues to decline.
But the failure rate from IND to regulatory approval is also dismal. It's 20, 30%. I mean, it's not as high as you'd like to be.
So it's publicly available information. It's a great report. You go to IQVIA, and I can't remember the name of the group, but it's quite good. Next question. And this might be our last.
Hi, I'm Bridget Glass with 3 Helix, and I have a question I think specifically for Cameron. So in earlier sessions here, we've talked about how there's kind of an issue with regulatory harmonization across, geographically. So say you're going through HREC doing your clinical trials in Australia. Is there anything to be aware of when transitioning that back to the US and filing for IND and getting that NDA approved? Is there anything you've seen with differences needed in vitro data, clinical data to be aware of?
Yeah, great question. Just in time. Largely, the data that comes out of Australia is accepted by every major regulatory body in the world. And so you can actually use data coming out of Australia, say during a phase 1 to support the IND filing with the FDA. European authorities accept, and so there's actually a good deal of harmonization amongst regulatory bodies worldwide. I can't really speak to China, though. Maybe you can.
No, and we're out of time.
Yeah, good.
Chuck, Amy, and Cameron, thank you very much, and let's have a round of applause for our audience.